we've got Robert Wolfarth, who is the Senior Manager of Regulatory Affairs at Merit. Robert has over 25 years of international and U.S. regulatory affairs experience, not only with strategy, certainly leadership, over 10 years of experience with direct reports. Robert has successfully authored 24 510K submissions, certainly has experience class 1, 2, and 3, has successfully offered 3 PMAs, actually got a ISO 1345 registration on the first try with the fewest amount of nonconformities that the BSI auditor had ever seen, I believe. Right. And he started his career, I'm sure, extremely young, maybe in high school, but he also had the first ceramic spinal implant that was cleared by the FDA. So an extensive amount of experience in regulatory affairs and also in the MDR. And we're super excited to have him tonight join us for a conversation on the 510K process, some nuggets relevant to that and PMA, and then interactions with the FDA. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the pandemic and leadership as well. So welcome, Robert. We really appreciate you joining us.
You bet. Thanks very much, Darwin. I appreciate that. Thanks for the kind introduction, and thanks to everybody for taking time out of your evening to call in. Let's jump right into this. I want to start out by kind of giving a high-level overview, either review or overview, depending on how familiar you are with all of this, of the U.S. submission process.
Excellent.
We'll leave other markets for another time. The European Union alone is worthy of at least a couple of seminars. So yes. we'll stick with the U.S.
Perfect.
I'll go through this overview relatively quickly because I know there are probably several of you that already know some of this, but it'll set up a framework for what we're going to talk about. In 1976, the FDA implemented a system of regulations which delineates all medical devices into one of 3 classes. These device classes are based on their risk to the patient. Now, the first class, brilliantly dubbed Class 1, captures the low-risk devices. So examples of these would be a bandage or a tongue depressor. Class 2 devices are, not surprisingly, the medium risk devices. For example, a blood pressure monitor, or perhaps a surgically invasive device, but one that's only invasive for a short period of time. So there could be in Class 2 some risk to the patient, but it's not going to be catastrophic risk.
I always think about that in terms of, the EKG machine or something that affects the patient, but is not invasive.
Yeah, exactly. Good example. Absolutely right. Now, Class 3 are the high-risk devices, such as examples that are often used, pacemakers, heart valves. These are mostly the permanent implants. So they can have catastrophic risk. If these devices fail during the use, it's usually not good news for the next of kin.
Right.
So there are lots of Class 1 and Class 2 devices out there on the market, but not so many Class 3s, mostly because the regulatory hurdles are so high. And for the most part, smaller companies can't afford to bring them to market. So generally speaking, Class 1 devices don't require FDA's permission to sell them as long as your company's quality system meets certain requirements. Conversely, on the flip side, Class 3 devices require a very rigorous FDA pre-market approval, or PMA, including typically a human clinical trial. The PMA process is a huge undertaking. It can take 5 to 7 years, can take longer, and it costs a lot of money. We'll get to that in just a moment. I'll talk a little bit
Millions.
Millions, easily into the millions. So we'll get to the PMAs in just a few moments. Let's talk about the medium risk category, which is actually very unique in its approach. No other country in the world has designed a system the way the FDA did to address these mid-range devices. Class 2 devices are brought to market by claiming and proving to the FDA that your device is, quote, substantially equivalent to another device, or what they call a predicate device, which is already on the market and has the same indications for use as yours. So you're putting them side by side and saying ours is substantially equivalent to theirs. The process for convincing the FDA that your device is substantially equivalent is through preparing and submitting a large set of documents collectively called a pre-market notification, but it's far more commonly known by its reference to the section in the regulations that addresses this process called 510K. So you'll hear people, I'm sure you're familiar with this, they just call them a 510K, and that's what that is.
And Robert, from I don't know if you've heard or you have a specific number reference, but what I'd always heard that in terms of 510K submissions, that anywhere from 45 to 48% of them are denied. I think 2018 was the last data I looked at, oftentimes just because of something being wrong in the submission in one of the sections that was left out.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, there's a screening process that I'll mention in a minute where the FDA will kick it back to you if it doesn't even have all the basic elements they expect to see.
Right.
Sometimes these are like new companies that have not written the 510K before. I am familiar with startup companies where they haven't hired a regulatory person yet. So a well-meaning CEO says, I can put this together. And, is doing his best. He puts together a 510K, but doesn't know the nuances, hasn't read the guidance documents or whatever else. And the FDA sends it back to him.
And we, I run into leaders in scenarios just like what you talked about. It was a startup, CEO, the VP, they end up getting involved in it. And maybe it's something as simple as, okay, this is maybe an implant. It doesn't have a software application, but you still have to have that section of the 510K in, and that there's nothing there to put in. You have to note that. You can't just not have it in there.
Right. You've got to show FDA that you have thought about that you addressed that issue.
Right.
They are kind of checklist oriented. They want to go down and make sure, has the company looked into this, and this. And if it is not applicable, put it in there and say it's not applicable. Don't just leave it out. So, okay. And there is a secret backdoor way to get your device to market faster, at least in theory, and under limited circumstances called emergency access. I'm joking about the secret. There's no secret backdoor way to get devices to market, but it's emergency access devices are allowed for medical countermeasures to national emergencies. That's what they're designed for. And COVID-19 is one of those, but it's only used when there are no alternatives. So under the Emergency Access Program, FDA commits to an accelerated timeline of review of your submission. I have a little bit of experience with these, and frankly, it really wasn't that accelerated. We did have their attention more, so there's more back and forth interaction with FDA, but in terms of overall time, at least in our case, it wasn't that much of a difference.
How did they? So one of the things I'm real curious to see is in terms of emergency authorization for some of these different products that are going on, but that doesn't mean final approval yet. You're getting that authorization to use it, but there's still additional data that needs to be collected and reviewed before that final authorization is completed. So I'm real curious to see how that plays out, because there's been quite a few products that have gotten that during the pandemic.
And that can be the case. Getting their green light doesn't, it's not black and white. I mean, the green light to go ahead, that's kind of a mixed metaphor, isn't it? Green or black and white. they can give you the go ahead to market it, but only under these circumstances, or only to a limited population, or we're almost ready to approve it, but we still need this, or so there's kind of a gray area there before you get the final approval. You can get the final clearance to market it, but it doesn't always happen that straightforward. Okay, so how do you write each of these submissions? Fortunately, FDA gives us pretty clear pathway for how to write each of them. There's a lot of information available on how to approach a regulatory submission. There's even a branch of the FDA which it stands ready to answer the phone and answer your questions. You can call in. You can even call in anonymously and ask just a question about
Really?
how this works. The group is called DICE, D-I-C-E, Division. Now I've gone blank. I don't recall what it is. You can find it pretty easily on the FDA website, but you can reach out to them and ask questions. I don't know of any other markets that provide nearly as much information as the FDA does. It's really nice. So let's focus on the 510K. That's the most common.
Division of Industry and Consumer Education.
There we go. Thanks very much.
Just magically came to me.
Oh, did okay? I'm impressed.
Well, you can't see the laptop that I have hiding to the side, but I was able to Google it quickly. So there we go.
There you go. Okay. So the first type of 510K, there are three types of 510K. And again, I'll go through this pretty quickly because some of you are aware of this. The first is the traditional 510K. This is the original type. The basic format of this hasn't changed much over the years, although the data that's necessary to support one has become a lot more rigorous over time. This traditional type is used for all new devices or devices that are already on the market and have substantial changes. You compare your device to a predicate device that's on the market and try to show that yours is substantially equivalent to theirs when used for the same purpose. The FDA tries to have a decision back within 90 days on a traditional. Now, I say tries to. They are not bound by any law to do that. That's a goal. They want to. It makes them look good to their bosses and so forth, but it's not a hard and fast rule. The second most common type of 510K is used under special circumstances, and it is brilliantly called the Special 510K. This program was created in 1998. It's used when you're simply modifying some aspect of your own device. So the predicate device is in fact your device. So you compare them side by side as the new version and the old version, or sometimes the current version and additional versions. So it can be a line extension, for example. Or maybe the same device now, say, has a slightly modified geometry, which doesn't affect safety and performance or present some type of risk.
I always, again, use the example, probably because as a respiratory therapist, just doing, being in a hospital where you have to do multi-functions, you have to do lab work, you have to do ventilation, and have to do the EKGs. And so I always use that example of it's doing the exact same thing in terms of what it determines, but maybe it's more ergonomically correct. It's got a better handle. It's got better wheels. It does something that clinically it's going to do the same thing for the patient, but it has some other bell or whistle that's not going to necessarily affect towards the patient, and that your predicate, you're mirroring that. It's going to do the same things, but it's got our flavor to it, so to speak.
Yeah, very good example, although you need to be careful of if it is better, stronger, faster, are you going to claim that in your marketing literature to the customer? If so, that could, under some circumstances, require to be converted to a traditional 510K because you're kind of going somewhere new with it.
Yeah.
So it depends, and of course they would request data to support this new claim. It's much more robust than the previous version. Oh, really? Show us the data. You're going to get into that kind of discussion with FDA, which is fine if you have the data. Okay, so special 510K, FDA tries to have the decision back to you within 30 days. It requires a shorter review time because in theory, they've already reviewed most of the information about your device in the traditional 510K that got the device on the market in the first place. They're just looking at the changes. And again, there's a good guidance document on special 510K program on FDA's website. The third type and least commonly used, also created in 1998, is called the abbreviated 510K. Not many companies use this pathway. Some do. It also has a 90-day review clock and is based on adhering strictly to accepted standards or guidance documents. So it's a little different in its approach than the traditional 510K.
What's the breakdown from your perspective of how many traditional versus special, for example? Do you have any idea of what that looks like generally for the FDA?
I looked that up once, Darwin, and I don't recall exactly what it is. It's far and away more traditional and special than abbreviated.
That's what I thought.
I believe that there are more traditional than specials. Because all devices have to go through traditional at some point to get on the market in the first place, right. And then a special if you decide to make changes and modifications. So you would think that there'd be more traditionals, but if you get a syringe on the market using a traditional and you make slight modifications to it 10 times over the next 20 years, maybe that's 10 specials. So I'd have to go back and look at the statistics. FDA publishes those types of statistics, though.
I thought that it was pretty high in terms of traditional, was my understanding, like 80% or so, but I wasn't positive. It's been a while since I've looked at that.
Yeah, check their annual report. FDA, the Center for Devices and Radiological Health will publish an annual report every year, and it'll have statistics like that. Okay, so when you, and this gets back to a point you made earlier, Darwin, when you send these 510Ks in to the FDA, all three of these types go through a screening process first to see if they have the basic elements necessary for FDA's consideration. If they don't, FDA will immediately refuse to accept it and send it right back to you. So that's actually a relatively new program. It's been around for a few years, but
is that in the first 15 days that they let you know whether it's accepted or something's not right, and then it's going to be rejected and you have to start over?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It'll come back to you if it's missing one of those basic elements. And there's an actual checklist and again a guidance document that'll help with this, to make sure that, so you can go down and make sure you've got all of those basic elements, present that checklist to them, and it helps them, okay, I need this, and this. Yes, I have it. It's on this page. You can make it very simple for them. Get you past that screening easier. And of course, all of these 510Ks do require a fee for review. That fee changes each year. It's currently about $12,000 for a 510K. And each year, when I say changes, you can probably guess which direction it typically goes.
Right.
So when they do accept your 510K, consider it likely that you will be asked for additional information sometime during the review. No matter how complete you think your submission is, you may have written a brilliant 510K, they are likely to come back and have some kind of questions. This request for additional information sometimes comes as an informal email or a phone call. Sometimes it comes as a more lengthy AI letter, additional information letter. If you get one of those letters, that will typically stop the clock of the review cycle. So if they're in a 90-day review cycle, you might hear silence for 80 days, and then you get an AI letter. Hopefully it's not that much of a surprise. Sometimes it is, though. And the AI letter has 8 questions. These are not questions you can just answer all of them quickly on the phone. You may have to do some research. You might even have to repeat some testing.
Okay.
So FDA stops their review clock at day 80 because it's no longer on their desk. Now it's back on your desk until you answer the questions. Once they receive your answers, clock starts again.
And how much time do you have before you have to get your responses back to them?
Usually FDA will give you, I believe it's 180 total days. Sometimes that's negotiable for compelling reasons. The sooner you can get it back to them, the happier FDA is, and the happier your boss is, because you're going to get it on market faster. But if you get an AI letter, it's good to be in contact with the FDA, and I'll go into that in a moment here, and let them know how long it's going to take, and say, our company will get this information to you by X date.
From your experience, Robert, do you find that those that do pre-sub meetings before the submission, that they have less AI scenarios after the fact, or have you had any specific experience relevant to that?
That is certainly the goal. It's really hard to come up with that metric because there's so many variables at play. Each 510K is different. It just might be a more challenging device with more nuances, but that is certainly the goal. If you have a Q-sub or pre-sub meeting, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment too, and that certainly it gives you an opportunity to ask questions and maybe resolve some things that you weren't sure about, so that you don't send it in blind only to find out FDA says you're just going way the wrong direction here. That's not what we had in mind at all.
Yeah, it had no chance.
Right, exactly. Okay, so that is a high-level overview. Let's jump into some strategies for the 510K process. What are some tips and tricks for success? How do you maximize your chances for successful clearance to market your device? Here's a little nuance. Notice that I said clearance, and that words are important to FDA. 510Ks are cleared; they're not approved. If somebody in your marketing department wants to say this is 510K approved, be careful. FDA can get bent out of shape about that. They don't like that. PMA devices are approved. 510Ks are cleared.
Okay.
A subtlety, but important to FDA. Okay, here's some ideas, and I'll just go through these, and now's your chance. Pick up your pen, take a few notes. Number one, make sure that your procedure for writing and submitting 510Ks is consistent with current FDA guidance. Most companies do have a procedure. I hope you do, for writing and submitting 510Ks. Don't just implement that procedure and let 10 years drift by and you haven't gone back to check. They've issued guidance, they've changed their perspective. So keep an eye on that. Number two, use a 510K submission template. I think this helps tremendously with having consistent submissions. It also keeps RA specialists in line with current FDA thinking. So if you put together a template, then your format will be consistent of where you put what. If you submit a lot of 510Ks, they get used to your format at FDA. They know what to expect. But be careful when using boilerplate verbiage. Say, for example, about your shelf life testing. Always read it over and make sure it's absolutely accurate for this particular product. It's a pitfall. Sometimes people work up a couple of paragraphs that talk about our shelf life testing, our biocompatibility testing, and they put it in every 510K.
Like one size fits all.
Exactly, and it may fit most, but the one time it doesn't fit all, you will have submitted inaccurate data to FDA, and you're going to find yourself scrambling, probably submitting a follow-up 510K, trying to explain your way out of how you just signed a document saying everything in here is truthful and accurate. Actually, it isn't. Can we go back and erase this part? It's so, okay. Number 3, maybe the most important piece of advice in writing your 510K. That should get your attention.
Yes.
Tell a story. Don't just put all of the test reports together in a document and have each of your sections of the 510K say, this device passed all tests, see Appendix A for the report. Remember, the FDA knows nothing about your device. Start out, this is what I typically do, start out by describing the clinical need. Then tell them how your company designed a device that meets that need. Tell them who your target customers will be and why. Remember, you're not trying to say that your device is better, just substantially equivalent to another device. Nor are you trying to sell your device to the FDA. So don't just use marketing's collateral.
What you talked about earlier about being approved, right, with the PMA versus the FDA saying that what's the word? Sorry. Cleared. Yeah, cleared, because they're clearing that what you're saying, that it does the same type of thing. That is why it's cleared, but the risk is still on you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well put. Exactly true. So only after you have painted all of this picture that I described do you start telling them why it is justified that this product is safe and effective, meaning your risk mitigations, your testing, how you label it, and so forth. I like to think of your 510K as like a college thesis. You're going to write it, you're going to rewrite it, you're going to submit it, and then you're going to defend it. Yeah. So you have to think through what you're presenting to FDA like you're telling a story to them. Explain it all to them. They don't know what you know. Just keep that in mind.
I think that's a great example when you think about, to me, a huge aspect of regulatory affairs as a profession is that emotional maturity, how you de-escalate risk, and how you lead stakeholders. And obviously, you don't have to be an expert at every single section. You're having people that support you in those different sections, but you've got to understand all the data that goes in there. And to your point, being able to defend it.
Yep, exactly. There's a perception, I think it's kind of a standing joke among regulatory professionals that other departments picture us as simply taking data from all other departments, stapling them together, mailing it off to FDA. Why do we pay these people to do this? But there's a lot more to it than that. There is, as I said, writing that story. There's also the art of persuasion, which is a soft skill that's very important and critical. You have to have that integrity. You have to tell them everything exactly accurately, and present the data. But in the negotiations back and forth with them, you're advocating on behalf of your company.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of skills involved in doing this. I have found that some sections of the 510K lend themselves better to this kind of narrative prose than others. The sections where you describe the device, obviously, is a great place to tell that story about your device. On the other hand, material characterization, biocompatibility, and so forth are more scientific. These sections can lean more on just the numbers. If you are listing numbers, and you will find that you are, present them in tabular format.
Okay.
It's easier to understand numbers in a table than it is strung out in a paragraph. FDA loves tables, before and after tables, side-by-side comparison tables, all kinds of tables. They love that. It helps them to see.
It's cleaner and gives it better structure.
Yes, exactly. On a similar note, images where you can, JPEGs of your device's isometric drawing, its packaging, maybe a drawing of it being used, maybe side-by-side drawings of your device and the predicate device, so they can see these visuals. Visuals are very helpful to the reader. I have seen companies that on the cover page of their 510K, they'll put, their company name, the name of the device, 510K, and all of that. And they'll have a big image right on the front of that device. So it's the first thing that FDA sees when they receive it. And they can kind of flip back to it and look at it as it's being described to them. Another pointer I would recommend, ask another regulatory specialist on your team to review your 510K before you send it out. Not a deep dive into all the data and the test results, but just to see, does your logic make sense? Are all those basic elements there? Do the hyperlinks work within your document? All those little things that you might overlook if you just finish it and send it off.
Two sets of eyes, always better than one. That's definitely, FBI negotiations. They always have more than one person because you get more likely to miss something if you just have one person. We have those checks and balances here for sure.
Yep, exactly. Another recommendation, collect statistics on the FDA concerns that you receive during their review of your submissions. Each time you receive an AI letter on a 510K or even just through a phone call, add those FDA questions to maybe a spreadsheet that you keep, that you're compiling over the course of multiple 510Ks. Then notice the trends, and you can update your procedure accordingly, or your approach to 510Ks. You start to notice that, gosh, maybe we're not doing our biocompatibility presentation right because 3 times we've gotten a question from FDA on this, or something like that.
That's so smart. And we've had several scenarios with clients that have acquired other companies, and then through the remediation and integration of the quality management system, for instance, those that have gotten in the most trouble, it's because they're not going back and looking at the design history file and what those, nobody's looked at it for 3, 4, 5 years. And then how the company's grown, they go back and look at it. And that's why they've gotten in trouble, because they're not verifying and enhancing their best practices. Exactly.
Learn from history. And of course, I hope it goes without saying, share these trends with any other regulatory staff in your company. Don't keep it all to yourself. You may learn all these great trends. Teach them, they teach you. Get together with other people in your team and talk about, trends that you're seeing. One more point, keep informal conversation alive with your reviewer if you can. That's not always easy to do, and it's a balancing act. You don't want to become a pest. Remember that your reviewer feels as overworked and short on time as you do. So don't just contact them out of the blue just to see how things are going. Unless you're getting very close to the end of the review cycle and it's been silent the whole time, you could ping them then. But let them know that you're available to answer any questions, and just be there and keep conversation, available to the extent that they want to have it.
What's been your experience in terms of percentage of interactions, let's say via email versus on the phone having a conversation?
I would say most everything starts out by email. That's been my experience. And I actually like that because I like having something in writing.
Yeah.
I'm a regulatory guy, so of course I do. But it's not just to document, and that's important. You do want to document what FDA is looking for, but it helps you if you need to forward that email over to the engineer who designed this. It's great to be able to capture the exact wording of what FDA said and just forward it over to them, and they can look at it and say, oh, yeah, I could answer that. Rather than you remembering, what did he say last week in that phone call?
And something getting lost in translation.
Exactly. So I don't know percentage-wise, but I would say easily the majority of communication that I've received have at least started by email. Sometimes you can transition over to a phone call. I have had experiences where I've received an email and then I wasn't quite sure what they were asking, and I think I can just, get this real quick. And I just say, hey, can I give you a quick call? And they say, sure. And I just call them up and have a quick chat with them. So it can go multiple directions, and you just kind of have to feel that out.
That makes sense.
So speaking of keeping these conversations alive, communications with FDA have really improved remarkably, I'd say in the last 10 years or so. There was a time when relations between industry and FDA were really standoffish. Neither side trusted the other, and it's really changed a lot. Nowadays, it's a lot more congenial. FDA still has rules for when and how to reach out to them, and guess what? There's a guidance document out there. Helps with communication with FDA, but they are openly encouraging more early interaction with them, so that you don't get to the end of the regulatory submission, as we talked about a moment ago, only to find out that they don't like your whole approach to that topic. If you send in a 510K submission, I think it's likely that you're going to get some kind of either verbal or email interaction with your lead reviewer. There's a few things to keep in mind. Here's some pointers on communication with FDA. Number one, don't freak out if the FDA calls you. It's a federal agency. Some people get a little jumpy. Pick up the phone. They're usually cordial. Sometimes they're very friendly. They're not trying to trick you into saying something that you shouldn't. They're people just like you. A lot of them are biomedical engineers. They just want to understand what you have sent to them. They may ask you a question about your device that you don't immediately know the answer to. This is absolutely fine. Just tell them that you'll get the information to them and give them a deadline by which you'll have it to them. The sooner the better, obviously. And please do not miss your deadline. Your credibility with FDA is everything. Give yourself a little bit of buffer if you need to. Try to get it to them fast. It's high priority for you. It's high priority for them. But don't say, I'll get it to you by Thursday, and then call them Friday morning and say, oh gosh, we were kind of busy. Sorry, haven't even looked at it. That doesn't look good.
Every time you interact with somebody, you either gain credibility or you lose it, right?
Good. Yeah, a good way of putting it. I agree. If you ask for too much time, they will let you know. So just go ahead and ask for the time you think you need and see what they say. Before you hang up the phone, be sure that you're very clear on what they want. You don't want to think you know, and then you go talk to your team and they say, well, do they want this or this? And you're thinking, gee, I don't know. then you have to go back and contact them again, and you don't want them rolling their eyes.
Do you ever have situations? Okay, you have that conversation, and you after you think you know what they have, would it be okay to email them to clarify? Yes. So that way you clearly stated to them, and then you're going to get that email back that says yes, and you then obviously have that email to verify it.
Yeah, very good point. And in fact, I recommend doing that. If you get off the phone with them and you do find that for some reason you're uncertain, or maybe there's more to the story than they understood, and you need to get back to them and clarify something, sure, send them an email and say, thanks for the call. We're jumping right on it. Just a point of clarification. Did I understand correctly that this is what you need? However you want to word it. But yeah, by all means, reach out to them and ask them.
I think, and then the other thing is you're showing that you did a good job listening.
Exactly. Back to your credibility. It's very important. Be respectful of FDA. For example, don't call them by their first name until they call you by your first name. Otherwise, it's Dr. Johnson until they say, hi, Bill, then you can call them by the first name. Only be as folksy as they are. Some of them are a little stuffy. I'll say that. I know it'll come as a big shock to everybody.
Respect.
That's right. It's a matter of respect. It really is. These people have worked hard to get to where they are, just like you have. So it's a tip of the hat to them. It shows that you're respecting them. Remember also that English is not the first language for some of these reviewers. So it's better not to wisecrack with them on the phone, because your jokes could be misinterpreted. If you hear that kind of blank silence on the other end, you've probably been misinterpreted. This will be familiar to those of you who have been through audits. Don't offer to send them more information than they asked for.
Yeah.
That could lead you to unnecessary questions and delays. I've heard people say, oh, do you want me to also send this?
Yeah.
Just send them, listen closely to what they want, send them exactly what they want. If you, for example, if they say, I want a copy of that test report, and you say, would you like the test protocol too? They didn't originally want it, but they're going to say, sure, yeah, send me that. They wind up reading that protocol. What if they find something that they don't especially like? You wind up going back and forth on a topic that they didn't even bring up and weren't interested in. So it's to just don't send them something.
That ties into the de-escalating piece, right? In terms of how you answer questions the right way. And if you don't answer it the right way, or you don't sound like you really know confident in what you're talking about, it's going to lead to more questions. So in terms of offering something that they didn't ask for, it goes along the same lines of de-escalation versus shining an additional light on something you don't need to.
Right. Yep, exactly. Another point, don't try to give them a lengthy explanation on the phone. If you are on the phone with them, try to keep answers there relatively simple. They're probably going to want your answer in writing anyway. Most answers they're going to want in writing, and certainly if it's something complicated, they're going to want it in writing. So if they say, well, I don't really understand how you guys approach this testing, try to avoid giving them a 15-minute discussion about, well, here's how we started, they're going to at the end say, oh, okay, I think I see it. Put all that in writing. You're going to have to put it in writing anyway. So, lastly, and I hope this goes without saying, please don't argue with them. If you do disagree, you are more than welcome to disagree. If you do disagree, it's better to just collect your thoughts with the team, put together your counterpoint in writing, and prepare that to send it back to them to show them the other perspective. Take note of their view, Again, if it's something simple, feel free to discuss your company's side of the issue with them on the phone, but don't get defensive. Don't get, of course, argumentative with them.
I like to think of it like dating, right? Probably not good to argue during the date. Very similar. You said don't give them a wordy response. We do a pretty detailed prep. From an interview standpoint, it should be conversational, right? You really, like tennis or ping pong, you really don't want it to stay on one side forever, right? Yep. So probably pretty good advice not to argue with the governing body.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. If it comes to that, you're probably not going to win the argument. So these guys always have 50% say in all of this, 51% say.
Yeah.
Okay. If you do have a submission that you're starting to craft and you need early feedback, this will go back to something Darwin said a moment ago. For example, how to approach testing or something, and you want to know this before you send in your 510K. Excuse me. One of the best ways to do this is through what's called the Q-Sub program. And once again, there's a good guidance document on the Q-Sub program. If anybody knows what Q in Q-Sub stands for, feel free to put it in the chat, or I have no idea. We had lots of jokes about what Q question sub, I don't know, quality stuff. Anyway, the Q-Sub program grew out of the pre-IDE program. So when you're putting together an IDE to support a clinical trial, that the FDA realized that this is a very useful program to have a pre-IDE discussion. So they broadened it into the Q-Sub program. And through this program, you can arrange to have a discussion with FDA before you send in your 510K. Now, you wouldn't use the Q-Sub meeting with FDA for every 510K, but only if you have specific questions about, say, unusual circumstances, and you want some non-binding advice from them on how to proceed. And I intentionally said non-binding. They will tell you that FDA, anything you ask them, they will say, well, here's general direction, but we'll have to wait until we see the actual 510K. They want to see it in context. They want to see the actual testing before they give a final yay or nay.
Nobody's put anything in the spot, because I kind of wondered that too, and I just did a quick search on it. Nothing came up. I always thought it stood for questions, or I guess made that assumption, because so we'll see if anybody comes up with something.
Quintessential submission. I don't know. Yeah, we've scratched our heads ever since the program came out. But okay, so for purposes of kind of comparing and contrasting, I'll talk a little bit about the PMAs. I won't go into too much detail there, but the PMA process could hardly be more different. Rather than trying to prove that you're substantially equivalent to a predicate device, you're starting from scratch with your own device. You don't care that it's equivalent to another device. In fact, you can claim that it's superior to another device if you want, as long as you can prove it in a PMA. You can't do that through a 510K. They will not they will not clear superiority claims. If you put superiority claims in your 510K, the FDA is not going to clear it. They're looking for equivalence. With a PMA, it's whatever the data shows. If your data shows that you're equivalent, they'll ultimately approve the PMA and allow you to claim it's equivalent.
That's why it costs so much more, because you got to gather that data, do the trials, and
exactly. Now, if your data does show that it's superior or non-inferior, those are two different things, then submit that data. If it's solid, if FDA agrees, they'll approve that, and you can put that in your marketing literature. That's not an option with a 510K. PMAs are, as you expect, far more complicated. FDA user fee, you remember I said it was about 12 grand for a 510K, $365,000, just the user fee, FDA for a PMA. That's a drop in the bucket. you can expect to spend probably, I would say, $20 to $25 million total, start to finish. Because not only do you have to do extensive bench testing, possible animal testing, but you're very likely to need a full comparative human clinical trial to support your to support your PMA. These trials can run for years. Most of them are 2 years. 2 years of follow-up. Then there's also the time it takes to enroll patients and so forth. After the very last patient is enrolled, that last patient needs to be followed up for 2 years. So it's long. Can involve hundreds, sometimes over 1,000 patients. A whole lot of work goes into them. So the PMA is the main avenue for these high-risk devices, those in class 3, the heart valves and so forth. As I said, it's not uncommon for a full PMA to take 5 to 7 years, sometimes longer. The culmination is a presentation in face-to-face to FDA in Maryland, not unlike defending your thesis or dissertation in the presence of clinicians and other experts. It's called going to panel. I had the opportunity to do that once, and it was, in a way, it was exhilarating at the end. Once it's over, we did get approval. We did pass panel, but leading up to it, I mean, we rehearsed over and over. We brought in consultants and experts. I mean, because everything comes down to that moment, your audit FDA.
So I've heard more than once that in terms of the entire regulatory affairs med device market from a talent standpoint, that less than 12 to 15% of the entire those in industry have PMA experience.
That wouldn't surprise me. That wouldn't surprise me at all. There just aren't that many PMA devices out there, and not that many companies that are selling PMA devices.
Yeah.
It takes a whole lot of capital. It takes a long time. It's very difficult for startups unless they're very well financed and well staffed to push through a PMA. It's just a huge undertaking. So, okay, that is, I have said a mouthful. That is the overview. I hope that
I think that was fantastic in terms of talking about the 510K process. I think some of the nuggets you gave in terms of interaction, managing your submission through the process, how you interact with the FDA. I think that, and then a little bit about the PMA. So in the time that we have left, what I'd love for you to do is give a little bit of the pandemic perspective in terms of, we just had a conversation about the audit and dealing with the virtual audit with the iPad, with the auditing company. But maybe give us some things that you've seen in terms of working remotely, managing teams remotely, and how the pandemic's affected you. And then we talked a little bit about, some of the positive things that are coming from it too, from the disruption. So.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So I'm in mid-level management now. I've actually been in management probably 18, I think, years. And before the pandemic really surfaced, I actually had a couple of direct reports that were remote from my location. So I had a little bit of experience with that. But of course, my company, like probably most of your companies, as soon as the pandemic hit, we scattered. We all went home. The boss said, for your own safety, go home. Let's try this new work from home thing, at least during this pandemic, and see how it goes. So suddenly I'm managing personnel all over my metropolitan area, but also I had people in other states. And it was it was a big test. It was a test for FDA. I was on the phone with a reviewer, and I said, can I ask a question? Are you working from home? And she said, absolutely, I'm working from home. They told us all to go home. we're not supposed to come back into the office except under XY circumstances.
Last number I saw was that 54% of the United States is working from home.
Wow, that's amazing. That's very impressive. So it was a grand experiment for my company. I know, because my company's kind of old fashioned and was a little unsure about this whole work from home thing. It's worked really well, at least for my my department. I think I can say my company. I have found employees to actually be more efficient working from home. It took a little getting used to. There was a lot of, VPN issues and all of this to work out. Make sure you can log into the server without compromising, anything. Get all the technical things. Once we ironed all that out, I think people really proved themselves. So I think it remains to be seen as COVID ultimately resolved. It remains to be seen, probably company by company, what's going to be the fallout? What's going to be the next step? Are employees going to more and more want to work remotely? If so, are we, our company, ready to entertain that? I don't know what the agency's thinking. Are they going to allow reviewers to work from home?
It's going to be interesting because there's studies that have been done that post, like one of them was done by CNBC, that over 75% of people, not specific to medtech, but just any industry that were surveyed, expect after the pandemic to have some aspect of autonomy, 1-2 days. And there are companies that are strategically right now targeting top talent and regulatory affairs to steal top talent by guaranteeing 100% remote with some travel post-pandemic where they don't have to go back into an office setting. So I certainly have clients, just as you described your culture, that was not really an option. I mean, certainly you could, if you've got something going on, you have a sick child, whatever, you can go home, but having remote days during the week wasn't really an option. And I think that it's going to be very interesting paradigm over the next 2 years, because my personal perspective is there's going to be companies that are going to have a harder time getting top talent in a niche area if they don't become more open to autonomy.
Yeah, if they hesitate, if they're unsure, or if they simply close the door on the option, it may come back to bite them. They may start losing talent, because all other things being equal, if an employee can work at company A, but they have to come into the office every day, wear a tie, they're going to be there at 8 until 5, all of this, or they can work from home, sleep in a little bit later, and yet still get the same amount of work done, be just as productive. They may go with company B and say, I like that option better.
I always say, and before starting my business, I had a home office, and then I traveled quite a bit for 12 years. But if you hire the right people, the right skill set, one of the bigger challenges you have from a home office standpoint is setting boundaries, because you can also end up working all the time. And certainly everybody is, when you get into regulatory affairs, professionalism and making sure you cross your T's and dot your I's kind of comes with the territory.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually something we're finding. I find that personally. I find myself, I'm trying to get better at this. Sometimes I just can't tear myself away. I will, 8 o'clock at night or something, I'll just check a few emails. No, don't do it. The day is done.
Welcome to my world.
I'm sure in your business, I'm sure that happens all the time.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard because it's right there in front of you. You've been sitting at that desk all day, and you think, maybe I'll just finish up this document. Next thing you know, you're up till 10 when you could have done it the following day. But anyway.
That's great. So and I meant to say this at the very beginning, but if anybody has any particular questions that they would like to pose to Robert, you can put them in the Q&A, and I'll ask him. If we get done and 10 minutes later, an incredible question comes to mind, as sometimes happens to me after the fact, you can send it in to me at info@suregsolutions.com, and we'll ask Robert and share with it after the fact. But if anybody has any particular questions, feel free to do that. What do you see? And this might be you can certainly choose not to answer this. I don't mean to put you on the hot seat, but but as you've seen, as you said, your company, that wasn't really something that was a part of the culture, but a lot of areas that we focus on, regulatory affairs, certainly design, quality, marketing. There's a whole bunch of aspects of positions that we work on that have the ability to be done remotely and then get together. And certainly with the technology today, you can interact in a way without having to be there and still be effective. Do you see your company changing from that standpoint? And again, you feel free to plead the fifth. So I'm not asking, it's not a guy gotcha question. So
well, I'll put the usual legal disclaimer at the bottom. The following forward-looking statements. No, I mean, I don't know, of course. I think the executives at my current company are probably talking this through right now. Yeah. They start to see the light at the end of the tunnel with the pandemic, and they're asking themselves, okay, sooner or later, the governor's going to give companies the green light, that restaurants are going to open, and all of this. What are we going to do? Are we going to is there ever going to be a go back to quote normal? Will there ever be a quote normal the way it was as we understood it before? How open are we to this? And companies are cognizant of the fact that you save money by not having all of your employees come in every day.
Well, it's space, certainly the cost of square footage. And more expensive places that you're located. We are one of the newer positions we've got in the last few weeks. I'm doing the needs analysis profile with the director, and we're talking about what this is going to look like, because this particular position is 100% remote, but before the pandemic would not have been. And I'm asking, well, what's going to happen? What's going on right now? And then what's the expectation? And the director's like, gosh, I really don't know, but she's like, I drive an hour to work, and like this last year, as challenging it has been, it's been great because I've been so much more efficient, and it's really surprised me how much better it's been for me after I kind of gotten used to it. And like, I really don't want to go back to driving every single day, 2 hours a day. Right. But it's hopefully going to create, certainly is going to create a lot of questions that have to be figured out once we get through this.
And plus, a lot of employees have set up their home office, and that everything is all set now. They've been doing this for almost a year. And the idea of having to kind of tear all that back down and go back to the office, it's like, it'd be so much easier. I can just continue working. I've proven that I can do it.
Right. So we do have a question. So taking two cleared devices, putting them together, a mashup of sorts, each leveraging a substantially equivalent device, but coming together in a new way, but no new real risk. No new real risk. Any general advice?
Very good question. FDA has been increasingly reluctant in recent years to clear 510Ks based on multiple predicate devices. In years past, they have done that. But what they're realizing is it doesn't make sense under the substantial equivalence paradigm, where you're saying our device is pretty much the same as their device. Once you start bifurcating that and saying our device is pretty much the same as their device for this purpose, much the same as this company's device for that purpose, then pretty soon it's no longer substantially equivalent to anything. It becomes kind of a hodgepodge. Now, of course, that's probably exactly what the company's trying to do.
But it's going to lead to more questions, which
it's what you're probably going to wind up doing is trying to find one main predicate device and arguing to FDA that this is our predicate. It's mostly just like this. However, we're just letting you know that not another predicate device, but just for purposes of comparison, for this little nuance over here, Don't worry, there's also another device on the market for that too.
Right.
However, keep in mind, if that other device, the third one, has different indications for use, is used for a different purpose, that's when it gets complicated, probably going to be problematic to get that past FDA. So it's pretty tricky. Worth a try, but you're going to get questions.
You're adding more complexity to the process. So great question, Jose. Thank you for that question. Had another person comment that they really appreciated the webinar, and everything that you shared was very useful.
Cool.
So that's great. Don't see too many other questions coming in here. So any parting thoughts that you'd like to finish up with?
Parting thoughts. I hate to say that we can thank COVID for anything.
Yeah, sure.
It's been an awful experience, absolutely awful. But it didn't introduce new technologies to the workplace. I think it simply accelerated their adoption.
Yes.
I think the net result of all of this, once we come out of these dark days of the pandemic, and we'll ultimately, in my opinion, we will have leaped forward in a lot of ways. We will be using technology to our advantage in a lot of good ways. I look forward to that. I think that's going to be good. I'm optimistic about this. Doesn't just affect regulatory affairs, doesn't just affect the medical device industry. I think that we have taught ourselves to be more efficient, use more resources, more technological resources. I'm looking forward to the future.
I think it's great. I'll make a point on that too. There are two more questions here. There's a Q&A and there's a chat, and I didn't flip back and forth. So have you had any experience? So the question is, have you had any experience with electronic 510K submissions? I know in the past, you had to have the paper and the electronic. One of the theories that I've heard is that you had to have the paper because you had the people that have been doing it for longer and, aren't as IT savvy, and that was why you had to have the paper version. But so the question is, have you had any experience with electronic 510K submissions?
Yes. So I have been submitting, I guess you could call them electronic submissions for some time, where the only thing to the FDA is a DVD.
That's what I thought.
And then maybe a cover page, one piece of paper, with a wet signature at the bottom that says, enclosed as a DVD, which contains the 510K. It is the exact 510K, the wording that they call for in the guidance document. But you don't need to send the big binders anymore with all the 3-hole punched paper. FDA has started a new e-submission program under a pilot program. We have sent some of those in where it's a little bit different. You don't even send in anything. You simply upload onto their server pieces of the 510K in locations that they predetermine. So they have a server and they'll say, I'm making this up. I can't see it right now in front of me, but put all your biocompatibility data here. You upload it and put it in right there. You do that with the whole 510K. So you never actually mail or email them anything. You upload the entire 510K to their server, and it's exactly in the locations they're anticipating. This is a new program, and I think they're only allowing it for certain products. I have to go back again. There's a guidance document on it.
Yeah.
But I think those things are great.
We've done some SSI in the news developments on some of the pilot programs and how they're trying to expand those, and actually asking companies to bring more options for those. The other question was, have you heard of any 510Ks that were cleared based only on emergency user authorization?
I am sure that there are. Especially under COVID, I can't imagine that there's not. I think that specific ones I don't know. I haven't been that close to that. My company doesn't really focus on that. But as we are in a pandemic, which is a national emergency, and there are areas where there are no alternatives, FDA is just as eager as you are to get some. I'm sure that there are examples of that. I don't know of any off the top of my head.
That's fair. So I think that's all our questions at this point. Again, if anybody has some after the fact that you'd like to ask, certainly. And somebody jumped in terms of PCR testing. I mean, there's been multiple examples because of IVD diagnostic testing. One of the things we put out, one of the companies got emergency authorization to test for multiple samples at one time. And then they're getting additional things that are being added on. Somebody mentioned rapid testing kits. So there's certainly a lot of different things going on with the IVD industry that's been completely. One of our clients has brought like 8 different solutions to the marketplace that have brought value just in a 9-month period. So that's certainly an area that we're very focused on.
As soon as I know that some came to market, like the nasal test that everybody's familiar with, and then as soon as that got in wide distribution, then there's a new saliva test. You know, so these keep coming out as new ideas come out. FDA's happy to help you get to market. They're not going to compromise safety and efficacy, but they're going to try to expedite it. It helps the public health.
You look at the vaccinations right now with J&J's just coming out, and where from 14 days post, how they're looking at it's one shot. Moderna's going to have to turn around and have another shot because of the different strains, whereas J&J's is supposedly not going to have those challenges. So, well, as we finish up here again, and I appreciate your perspective. RAPS Convergence, they did a great job. First virtual convergence ever. Everything, conversations about disruption leading to positivity, improved and enhancements to virtual clinical trials, software as a medical device, artificial intelligence. You and I were talking before we got on in regards to telehealth. Less than 10% of the U.S. population was involved in any aspect of telehealth personally before the pandemic, and now it's over 50%. And a lot of people, telehealth's been something that's been out there, but just hasn't moved in a lot of ways. And now there's a lot of positive that is coming from that. Continual annual growth rate for artificial intelligence in terms of robotics, wearables, software as a medical device. All of those areas is, predicted to grow into the 180 billion within the next 6 years, 26% continual annual growth rate. So disruption, right? Hopefully it's going to lead to a lot of positivity. And certainly at our household, we try to talk about some of the things that we're doing and that have happened that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the pandemic, that are positive. So we're focused on proactivity and positivity versus the alternative.
Yeah, it at least gives us more options. As an industry.
Thank you so much. Very grateful, Robert. Always a pleasure talking to you, and I couldn't be more grateful. I think people will really appreciate all the information that you shared, and I really appreciate your kindness in giving us your time tonight.
Happy to. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Hear me, would you speak to me when I open up? And I forward my thoughts to you, but sometimes I'd say you're thinking too much, and I don't want to hide on this.